When people hear the name Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, they often think of a tall man with fiery red hair, a philosopher turned politician, and of course, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. His words shape the foundation of a nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, yet behind the elegance of his sentences, behind the image of the Enlightenment thinker, there was a man who lived with secrets, obsessions, and unanswered mysteries that have followed him for centuries. Jefferson was not just a politician. He was a man of contradictions, a champion of liberty who owned slaves, a president who expanded American territory with the Louisiana Purchase but feared centralized power, a philosopher who collected knowledge obsessively but kept many of his letters hidden from public view. One of the most fascinating enigmas of Jefferson's life revolves around his personal library. It wasn't just a collection of books, it was a treasure trove of philosophy, science, law, architecture, and ancient history. He built it over decades, and it eventually became the core of what is now the Library of Congress. But the story is not as simple as a man donating his books to a nation. Jefferson's library had layers of mystery, rumors that hidden messages were tucked inside certain volumes, cryptic notes in the margins, and even coded correspondences slipped between the pages. But let's not rush ahead. To understand the man who crafted the nation's most famous document, we must first go back to 1776, when a 33-year-old Virginian sat in a rented room in Philadelphia with ink, paper, and a mind bursting with ideas. The birth of the Declaration. Jefferson was chosen to draft the Declaration not just for his writing skills, but because his colleagues John Adams and Benjamin Franklin knew that he had a flair for turning philosophy into prose. Jefferson admired the writings of John Locke and Montesquieu, philosophers who had dreamed of liberty, natural rights, and the social contract. Yet, he did more than copy their ideas. He crafted a vision, words that could ignite a revolution. Imagine the scene: Philadelphia in June 1776. The air was thick with summer heat and political tension. Outside, the city buzzed with talk of independence and war. Inside, Jefferson bent over his desk, scratching his quill across parchment. He wrote swiftly, sometimes rewriting entire passages, sometimes pausing to gaze out the window in deep thought. He wanted the document to be more than just a declaration. It was a statement to the world, a challenge to monarchy, and a moral justification for rebellion. He poured himself into it. And yet, when he presented it to the Continental Congress, much of his draft was altered. Passages were removed, words softened. One section in particular, his condemnation of the slave trade, was deleted, a compromise to maintain unity among the colonies. Jefferson was bitter about those edits. In private, he kept the original draft, perhaps as a reminder of the words that were too radical for his time. That tension, the public version versus the private truth, would echo throughout his life. The collector of knowledge. While Jefferson shaped politics, he was also shaping a private world, his library. From his early years, he had been a voracious reader, ordering books from Europe on history, science, architecture, and philosophy. He didn't just read them, he annotated, categorized, and sometimes left peculiar notes in the margins. Monticello, his Virginia estate, became not just his home but a laboratory of the mind. Inside, Jefferson surrounded himself with telescopes, globes, maps, and thousands of volumes. He believed knowledge was power, the true key to liberty. But Jefferson also had a peculiar habit. Some of his books contained folded letters hidden between the pages. Some were his own, others were correspondences from allies, coded or written in invisible ink. During his presidency, when political enemies accused him of being too close to France or too sympathetic to radical revolutions, Jefferson's private writings became even more secretive. Certain letters vanished from the official record. Historians have found evidence that some of these letters were deliberately destroyed by his family after his death, suggesting that Jefferson himself wanted parts of his story erased. A whisper of secrets, mysteries of Jefferson's library, deepened after 1814, when the British set fire to Washington, D.C. During the War of 1812, the young nation's Library of Congress was destroyed. Jefferson, then retired, offered to sell his personal library to Congress, over 6,000 volumes. He wrote, "I cannot live without books." But when the books arrived, librarians noticed something unusual. Some volumes contained annotations that seemed coded, others had pages with odd stains, faint outlines of writing, or strange bookmarks. A few even contained folded papers with references to people and events unknown in the public record. Speculation grew. Had Jefferson used his library not just as a source of learning, but also as a kind of secret archive. Were there correspondences he never intended the public to see, letters to European revolutionaries, drafts of speeches too controversial to be spoken, or even personal confessions? One particular story has circulated among historians, that hidden within the Jefferson collection was a set of letters written in cipher involving communications with foreign agents during the 1790s. If true, they could change the way we understand his role in early American politics. Shadows in the margins. For a man who valued the light of reason, Jefferson seemed to live surrounded by shadows of secrecy. He invented ciphers, corresponded in codes, and even used special chemical inks. His allies trusted his intelligence, but his enemies suspected he played a deeper game than he admitted. The question remains, what truths did Jefferson bury in his books? As the years passed, many of his letters were lost, burned, or hidden. His descendants, protective of his image, are believed to have withheld certain documents from the public. And yet, from time to time, a new Jefferson letter surfaces, sometimes in an auction house, sometimes discovered in a private attic, rekindling the mystery. What was Jefferson so determined to hide? Was it simply the contradictions of his private life, the realities of slavery, debts, and personal struggles? Or was there something more, something that could still shake the legacy of the man who wrote America's founding creed? The answers, it seems, remain scattered in the margins of books, in coded notes, and in the whispers of his vanished letters. If Monticello was Jefferson's temple of architecture, then his library was his cathedral of thought. To step inside was to enter a world where the past, present, and future collided in ink, parchment, and binding. For Jefferson, books were not just possessions, they were companions, guides, and sometimes keepers of secrets he never dared to speak aloud. Building the collection, Jefferson began collecting books at an early age. By the time he was in his 30s, he already had one of the finest private libraries in the colonies. He didn't collect casually, he collected systematically. His books covered philosophy, law, architecture, music, botany, astronomy, and history. He once wrote, "I cannot live without books," but this wasn't an ordinary collection. Jefferson had a meticulous way of organizing knowledge. He divided books into categories that reflected the Enlightenment mind: memory, history, reason, philosophy, and science, and imagination, the arts. His library was a reflection of his belief that knowledge was the foundation of a free society. Yet, as historians have discovered, Jefferson's library wasn't just about knowledge. It was also a labyrinth of hidden messages, strange annotations. Many of Jefferson's books contain his handwritten notes. At first glance, they appear to be simple reflections or translations. But in some volumes, the annotations don't make sense: cryptic marks, symbols, or abbreviations that scholars have struggled to decode. For example, in a French edition of Montesquieu's The Spirit of Laws, Jefferson scribbled what appeared to be a set of numbers and letters in the margins. To some, it looked like a personal indexing system, but others argue it resembles a cipher code, the same kind of code Jefferson used in correspondence with trusted allies. Jefferson was fascinated by secret writing. He invented his own device called the wheel cipher, two interlocking discs that could be rotated to encode and decode messages. This invention was so advanced for its time that variations of it were used by American diplomats for decades. If Jefferson used his cipher wheel for official letters, is it really so hard to believe he also used it to hide private truths in his books? Letters between the pages. There are stories, half confirmed, half myth, about letters Jefferson hid inside his books. During his lifetime, Jefferson corresponded with hundreds of people: philosophers in France, politicians in America, scientists in Europe. Some of these letters were routine, but others were deeply personal, even dangerous. One tale tells of a bundle of coded letters Jefferson kept hidden inside a Latin volume on Roman law. These letters, reportedly written during the 1790s when the French Revolution was at its height, contained Jefferson's candid opinions about monarchy, revolution, and the dangers of unchecked power. If revealed at the time, such opinions could have been politically explosive. Another account suggests that Jefferson kept private letters from a mysterious correspondent in France, a person historians have never identified. The letters were supposedly folded tightly and slipped into the pages of books on Enlightenment philosophy. Some claimed these were romantic in nature, others insisted they dealt with clandestine political plots. The truth? No one knows for certain, because so many of Jefferson's personal letters were deliberately destroyed after his death. The sale to Congress, the most dramatic chapter in the story of Jefferson's library, came after the War of 1812, when the British burned Washington, D.C. In 1814, the Library of Congress was destroyed. Jefferson, retired and in financial trouble, offered to sell his entire personal library, 6,487 books, to Congress. He saw it not only as a financial necessity but as a patriotic act. In his letter to Congress, Jefferson wrote, "I do not know that it contains any branch of science which Congress would wish to exclude from their collection." Congress accepted, and Jefferson's books became the new foundation of the Library of Congress. But when the collection arrived, whispers began. Some librarians noticed oddities: volumes with folded scraps of paper, faint writing in margins, even what looked like erased passages that still left ghostly traces. One book, a treatise on ancient Rome, reportedly had a series of tiny pinpricks forming patterns in the text, a technique known in Jefferson's time for encoding hidden messages. Were these just quirks of a man obsessed with study? Or had Jefferson quietly transferred not only books but also fragments of his secret life into the nation's archive? A missing collection. Not all of Jefferson's books went to Congress. Before the sale, he carefully separated out volumes he wanted to keep for himself. Some of these books later appeared in family inventories, but others simply vanished. Scholars today believe that among the missing volumes were those containing Jefferson's most sensitive annotations and hidden letters. His descendants, perhaps fearing scandal, may have destroyed or concealed them. Yet, from time to time, a book believed to belong to Jefferson surfaces in an auction house or a private estate, carrying with it a new clue to his hidden world. One such discovery occurred in the mid-20th century, a volume of Cicero with Jefferson's handwritten notes. Inside was also a folded slip of paper bearing what appeared to be a coded sequence of numbers. Historians are still debating its meaning. The secret correspondence. We know that Jefferson maintained secret correspondences during his life. He exchanged letters in cipher with James Madison, Albert Gallatin, and American diplomats in Europe. These codes were meant to protect sensitive information from political enemies and foreign spies, but there are rumors, never fully confirmed, that Jefferson also corresponded secretly with European radicals, sympathizers of the French Revolution, and perhaps even agents of Napoleon's government. If such letters exist, they could change the way we understand his presidency and foreign policy. Did Jefferson quietly encourage revolutions abroad while maintaining a careful diplomatic face at home? Or were these coded letters more personal confessions, doubts, or even romantic exchanges he wished to hide from public eyes? Knowledge as power, secrets as legacy. Jefferson once wrote, "Knowledge is power, knowledge is safety, knowledge is happiness." He believed in the pursuit of truth, but he also believed that truth sometimes needed to be protected, hidden, or revealed only when the time was right. His library was not only a monument to learning, but perhaps also a vault of secrets. When Congress received it, they may have inherited more than just books. They may have inherited puzzles Jefferson never intended to be solved. Toward the shadows of Monticello, Jefferson's life drew to its end. He spent his days at Monticello, surrounded by his books, letters, and inventions. Visitors described him as calm, reflective, still scribbling notes late into the night. But one visitor recalled seeing Jefferson hurriedly tuck away a folded letter when someone entered the room. What was in that letter? Who was it from? By the time Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence, many of his most private papers had already been sealed, destroyed, or scattered. What remains is a tantalizing mystery. How much of Jefferson's true thoughts, fears, and beliefs still lie hidden in forgotten volumes, in margins no one has studied, or in coded notes yet to be deciphered? By the time Thomas Jefferson reached the twilight of his life, the world saw him as a founding father turned sage, a man who had shaped a nation and then retired into the quiet dignity of Monticello. But behind the stately facade of the author of the Declaration of Independence, there lingered whispers of vanished letters, erased truths, and secrets deliberately left behind. If Jefferson's library was his legacy, then the missing fragments of it were his final mystery, the disappearing paper. After Jefferson's death on July 4th, 1826, the very same day as his old rival turned friend John Adams, his family faced a monumental task, sorting through decades of accumulated letters, manuscripts, and books. Thousands of documents were eventually preserved and published, but not all of them. Contemporary accounts suggest that Jefferson's daughter, Martha Jefferson Randolph, and other relatives carefully selected which papers to keep and which to destroy. The reasons were obvious. Jefferson was already a revered figure, and the young United States needed its heroes to remain unsullied. Anything that could tarnish his image, especially on sensitive matters like slavery, politics, or personal relationships, may have been burned in the fireplaces of Monticello. What was lost? Scholars can only guess. Letters hint at a deeper, more conflicted Jefferson, a man who doubted the permanence of the Union, who feared America might fall into monarchy, who carried private guilt that history has only glimpsed. The Hemings controversy. Among the most debated secrets of Jefferson's life was his relationship with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman at Monticello. Rumors swirled during his lifetime that Jefferson fathered children with her. For decades, historians debated and dismissed the possibility, sometimes out of respect, sometimes out of denial, but DNA evidence in the late 20th century confirmed that Jefferson was almost certainly the father of several of Hemings' children. The revelation cast his life in a new, complicated light. Here was the man who wrote that all men are created equal, yet maintained an intimate relationship within the very system of slavery he never dared to fully abolish. What did Jefferson write about Hemings? Almost nothing. No direct letters survive, and perhaps none ever will, leading some to believe that any such correspondence was deliberately destroyed by his family. Was Jefferson trying to shield his descendants from scandal? Or did his heirs erase this truth to preserve his image as the philosopher president? The absence of evidence has become its own kind of evidence, a silence that speaks louder than words. The vanished correspondence with European mystery lies in Jefferson's time as a diplomat in France. He lived in Paris during the 1780s, immersed in the intellectual circles of the Enlightenment, befriending scientists, philosophers, and revolutionaries. His surviving letters from this period show a man deeply engaged with ideas of liberty, justice, and reform, but many letters are missing. Some scholars believe Jefferson corresponded secretly with radical revolutionaries, perhaps even encouraging movements that later turned violent. Others suggest that Jefferson wrote candidly about his doubts regarding American politics, letters so controversial that his family or even his political allies had them quietly destroyed. And then there are rumors of romantic correspondences with French acquaintances, hidden away or lost in the transatlantic shuffle. If found, such letters could reveal a Jefferson very different from the one carved into marble. The secret code. Jefferson's fascination with cryptography adds another layer to the enigma. He designed his wheel cipher, which would inspire American cryptographic methods for decades. He corresponded with allies using coded messages, sometimes in simple substitution, other times in complex numerical ciphers. But what of the letters we can't read? Several Jefferson documents contain markings that resemble incomplete codes, as though meant to be deciphered only with a missing key. Historians debate whether these were drafts, abandoned experiments, or messages never meant for public eyes. Some conspiracy-minded researchers suggest Jefferson deliberately left coded fragments, a puzzle for future generations, hidden among the papers and books of Monticello. Could there still be a message waiting to be unlocked in the faded ink of his annotations? A confession, perhaps, or a final warning about the fragility of liberty? Jefferson's final years. In his last years, Jefferson appeared serene. Visitors to Monticello described him as gentle, thoughtful, surrounded by books and inventions. Yet, in private, he struggled with debt, family concerns, and the weight of his legacy. He knew his life would be studied for centuries to come. On the eve of his death, he wrote one of his last letters, reflecting on the upcoming 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. He called it an act of power from the people, a document meant to inspire liberty around the world. His words were hopeful, even triumphant, but the letters he didn't write, or the ones he wrote and then destroyed, leave us with another picture: a man aware of his own contradictions, carefully curating how history would remember him. The puzzle he left behind. Perhaps Jefferson's greatest secret was not hidden in any single letter, but in the way he constructed his legacy. He gave the world soaring ideals, but left behind gaps, silences, and mysteries that ensure we never fully know him. Some historians argue this was intentional, that Jefferson believed future generations should grapple not only with his words, but with his omissions. That in the spaces between his sentences, in the missing letters, in the cryptic annotations of his books, he left a challenge to posterity to seek truth even when it is uncomfortable. In this way, Jefferson's legacy is like his library, vast, full of knowledge, yet threaded with shadows. For every book he donated, another went missing. For every letter he published, another disappeared into fire or secrecy. A nation of secrets. Jefferson remains one of America's most celebrated figures, yet also one of its most enigmatic. He was a man of the Enlightenment who believed in reason, but also in mystery. He championed liberty, yet lived with contradictions. He gave America its most sacred words, yet perhaps kept his most personal truths hidden forever. What survives are fragments, books with coded notes, letters that escaped the fire, testimonies passed down in whispers. And in those fragments lies the haunting possibility that we do not know Jefferson completely, that he left behind a story half told, half hidden, a puzzle stretching across centuries. Maybe that was his final gift or his final trick. Closing reflection: when we remember Jefferson, we remember the writer of the Declaration, the president who doubled the nation's size, the thinker who dreamed of liberty. But if we look closer, we also see a man who built labyrinths of knowledge and secrecy. Perhaps Jefferson understood better than anyone that history is never complete. It is a tapestry woven from what we preserve and what we erase. And in that tension, in that space between light and shadow, Jefferson still lives his true story, waiting to be uncovered.